Yeah, warm welcome. It's wonderful to see you all. In particular, when you come from outside campus, warm welcome to QET. Whether you work for another organization, another university, Queensland is always best when we perform as Team Queensland. And today, Team Queensland is dedicated to making the future a bit more tangible. Let us approach the future with more capability, increased capacity, and ultimately increased confidence. Before we go to the actual topic of exploring the future, and I'm delighted to introduce our guest speaker in a second. Of course, I would love, as the director of the Center for Future Enterprise, to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the place where we'll gather this afternoon. It means in the context of QET, the Turrbal and Yuaga people, and of course pay my respect to the elders past, present, emerging. QET is always very, very honored and proud to continue a very long-lasting tradition of coming together as a team, debate, and collectively walk away with richer insight and experience. My father was a tax consultant, and people would make half-an-hour appointments, and they would forever talk about the things they've done in the past. And my dad said, "We've got half an hour. The only things we can change is tomorrow." And in order to approach the future, and sort of the Center for Future Enterprise, the future as an asset to enterprises, we need to boost our future's literacy. We need to boost and build the capability to understand what might happen, to be able to react when the future hits us, but even in the perfect world, to approach this future very, very proactively. And it's quite amazing. I was talking to you about accountancy, and accountancy is all about the last financial year, and rarely about the next financial year. And if we can switch our mind to the thing that matters to all of us, our future, then we really, with much more insight and capability, approach the key asset that I think that's underutilized, and that's our future. When we crafted this seminar series, we really wanted to convert an attribute, future enterprise, into a noun, future. And so what you saw on our web pages, we today are proud to not just welcome the first presenter, but really to launch a whole seminar series. And it will not stop this year. I've got already the next speaker in the new year here, Colin. Thank you so much. This will continue for quite a while until we saturate and feel we with confidence and capability understand the future and how to approach it much better. I said this to you yesterday, and I say this again in public. I could not imagine a better individual than kicking off this session than Joseph. Someone said earlier when you arrived, Joseph left already a legacy, and I can't see any signs of slowing down. So it's very rare that someone coexists and is productive and has strong future ambitions, at the same time can say, "I left a legacy." But a lot of people in this country and beyond who are futurists and future professionals are standing on your shoulders and your tremendous curiosity and brain. Collectively, on behalf of the futurists in the world and those who benefit from those, I'd like to also thank you in public for what you've done over the last 25 years. I had the pleasure of having dinner with Joseph yesterday, and I feel you could entertain us for the next 3 days. And what I like about Joseph, you did your PhD at Monash University, proposing a mathematical extension to the general theory of relativity. Having read, what you said, every single word or most books, all books that Einstein ever wrote. And then dedicated to become a strategic foresight analyst, helping in this capacity Swinburne until we realize you're not just good at the desk, you're good on stage. And a master's on strategic foresight for nearly 20 years existed at Swinburne that again rested on your shoulders. And again, you're not just a person who works on campus, you go out, whether it's nationally, the Australian Defence, or internationally, the NATO. So these are global organizations who look at you to understand how to approach the future. I can safely say your immediate future, the next hours of your life, are in good hands. Make the most out of this. Joseph will kick this off. We record this session and we'll make it available. And after lunch, we'll also invite you, if you want to join us, for like a smaller roundtable conversation to make the most of the opportunity while we have Joseph in town. So thank you so much also for coming up from Victoria to join us. It's a tremendous effort. I'm heading over to you. Joseph will speak for 35 or 40 minutes, and then we have a bit of a Q&A opportunity. But again, from the bottom of our heart, Joseph, thank you so much for joining us. We very much look forward to listening to you. Thank you.
Thank you. Always be careful applauding before the presentation because you might not like what comes afterwards. If you're doing social media, please don't use images. I'm happy for you to use slides, but in the realm that I work in now, they've said just don't have more images of yourself out in the wild. So please respect that. I don't have my tinfoil hat here today, but the centre staff have already got that. They've had that talk today. All right, so I like to start these presentations with this, this quote. Stuart Brand wrote a book called The Clock of the Long Now. It's a 10,000-year clock. Ticks once a day, bombs once a century, and the cuckoo comes out once a millennium. Really deep time. The present moment used to be the unimaginable future. I'm going to talk about imagination a lot because that's actually central to doing future. So this is thinking about the future. A joke name that my students gave me is the Voroscope. So I liked it so much I bought the domain name and so now I blog there. So, and my colleague was Captain Foresight, Peter Hayward. So the background, yes, theoretical physics, electrodynamics, Einstein's non-symmetric unified field theory, what he did after relativity. Then there's internet stuff. I ended up working at Netscape briefly. If you've ever seen The Valley of the Boom, which is a docudrama, I got fired at the end of episode 4, start of episode 5, along with hundreds of others. I've been a futurist since 1998 at Swinburne for 20 years. Initially as a consultant at the Foresight Institute, then I worked as a strategic foresight analyst in the Office of the Vice Chancellor doing foresight. At the same time, I was a guest lecturer in the Master of Strategic Foresight that had been started. So I was both doing the doing, but also reporting on my practice as I was doing the doing. And so then I ended up going across and teaching into that for the whole rest of its run. So I was there on the first day as a guest and the last day to turn off the light. I've been an adjunct since then. I was a COVID redundancy, one of the first. Some things you don't want to be the first at. And so I've got various positions. I've been freelance since then, freelance, free range, some would say feral. But at SUT, Defence College, National Security College, Southern Queensland, and the last couple of years I've been helping out at NATO. I do those things. There'll be the cone graphic, which people just seem to love, so you can find that on there, plus a scanning retrospective that reports on all the scanning that I did as a foresight analyst 20 years ago. So you can judge for yourself whether this tired old brain was any good at what I'm talking about today. So the data is there. There's the track record. But first, take 30 seconds to think about, or maybe jot down, what comes into your mind when you hear the words. The future. Okay, now normally we'd have a big discussion, but I've got limited time today, but I want you to remember that because we will refer to it. And maybe after lunch or when you leave or when you're having coffee, you can say, what did you think about? And I'll be very surprised if you think about exactly the same thing. Unless you're a science fiction fan, in which case you'll probably think about exactly the same thing. So, when I started doing this job 25-ish years ago, what do you do for a living? I'm a futurist. I used to get versions of this. Who's going to win the grand final? Who's going to win the Melbourne Cup? What are the Chess Lotto numbers going to be? Right. If there's a single iconic image I want you to take away, it's that it's not about this. They used to ask me about flying cars in those days. Now they always ask me about AI. So if we've got time, I can show you some AI videos that I'm currently enamoured by. Arthur C. Clarke, very famous, invented the idea of the communication satellite in a paper in 1945. They're still called Clarke orbits, the geosynchronous orbits. Right. It's impossible to predict the future, and all attempts to do so in any detail appear ludicrous within a very few years. So it ain't about prediction, but it is about sensitising your mind to change. So that's really what this is about, beginner's mind and imagination. Now, when some of my old colleagues in the physics department discovered that I was doing futures, how the bloody hell did you become a futurist? And what is that even? And I said, well, and isn't that really different? I said, no, not really. I think they're very, very similar, actually. Theoretical physics, and so by the way, if you've ever watched The Big Bang Theory, it's not comedy, it's documentary. Both of them use conceptual frameworks to both explore the world and explain the world. And they both develop conjectural knowledge about the world. Science is conjecture. I conjecture that if I let this go, it should fall down. Confirmed. If it didn't, you'd say, what's going on? Now, the fact that it's a law of nature means that it's a conjecture that we're very, very confident in, but it could be falsified, and that's the key point. Even in science, there could be a change. Now, physics is based on empirical data, actual past events, and it's explicitly descriptive in the sense that it describes how things work, and it's implicitly prospective in the sense that if you assemble these causes, you should observe these effects. Okay, so there's an implicit prospective element to it, prospective knowledge. Futures also uses provisional data, so potential future events that may or may not happen. So already the complexity goes up. The knowledge is explicitly prospective. It's strongly time-bound. I mean, the law of gravity still works tomorrow, hopefully, when my plane goes back, as it did yesterday when I arrived. And it faces two problems. I call them the problem, the counterfactual, and the counter-Cassandra effect. The counterfactual is, if I tell you, don't walk across the road with your, like the expressway just out the window there, don't walk across that road with your eyes covered and your ears blocked, or you might get hit by a truck, and you do, and you survive, was that bad advice? The very counterfactual that doesn't happen is the thing that proves that the conjecture was valid. And yet, you don't want it to happen. So how do you know that it was good or bad advice? Okay? So it's counterfactual. Well, it didn't happen. Well, yeah, but learning is surprise plus memory. If you are surprised and taken out of the gene pool, then there's no learning from that. And the other problem is that if you actually listen to Cassandra, who said this bad thing is going to happen, and because you take action, it doesn't happen, they hate you. That was a waste of time. Okay, so they don't believe you because it hasn't happened, and if they believe you and it doesn't happen, they also hate you. So don't do futures if you want, group hub. We usually don't have the luxury of waiting for experimental verification before we need to use the knowledge for our strategic or policy decisions. Hence the idea there. It's like, don't bomb that Middle Eastern country because there could be reprisals. I'll say no more. Today is the 24th of June. So this is the dilemma we face. All the stuff that we can know about is about the past. Our knowledge can be relatively complete. There's still gaps in it, but all our decisions about the future. What we can change, we don't know about. What we can't change, we can know about. So that's the rock and the hard place. And so Willis Harman, who was one of the founders of the field, wrote a book called An Incomplete Guide to the Future, because how could it be otherwise? Every action decision involves some assumption about the future. The function of futures research is to make those assumptions explicit. So this is always about checking our assumptions. And typically when you have a bad reaction to an idea about the future, it's because some unconscious assumption has been crossed. That's very important. I'll get to that very soon. I was in Kyoto in 1997, about 2 weeks before the protocol was signed, on a gig for Netscape, as it turns out. So I went to this very famous rock garden, which, the monk comes out every morning and rakes the thing, and you sit there and you contemplate. So I'd like to offer you a koan, which is, how Zen works, about the future. The future does not exist, but that does not mean it isn't real. Now, again, if we had more time, I could let you stew on that for about 15 minutes and have a philosophical discussion about it. But the reason I say this is because when I started out doing this, people would say, well, it's not real. How can you study the future? You must be an idiot. My comment is that the future is as real as tomorrow or next week. How do I know this? Check your calendar. If there is anything in it beyond the present moment, then you are treating the future as real enough to alter the trajectory of your life, even though it doesn't exist. How did you get here today? You heard about something and you altered the trajectory of your life to get here. Based on what? Incomplete or ambiguous information. Or maybe a recommendation, or maybe there were likes on LinkedIn, or whatever it was. But there was some decision-making process, despite the fact that this was not real until now. So, if there's anything in it beyond today, then your question is merely one of time frame. How much of the future is real for you? the next minute, hour, day, week, month, year, decade, century, millennium, 10,000 years, million years, billion years, 13.8 billion years. That's how old the universe is, by the way. How much of that is real for you? Now, you would have checked out somewhere around here, right? Typically around about a century. Usually it's the time scale when you imagine you're going to have grandchildren. But sometimes it's shorter. When I worked at Netscape, the time ended at the end of the quarter. Right? There was no time beyond that. Everyone was dialing for dollars in the last 2 weeks of the quarter, trying to make, the money so the analysts wouldn't downgrade the company so it wouldn't, tank. We tanked. Happens eventually. So, it's merely on a time frame. The future doesn't exist, but that does not mean it isn't real. Because in the past, you altered the trajectory of your life to bring you to this moment. Hopefully you're not regretting that now, but maybe you are. Okay. So the foundational axiom of future studies is the future is not predetermined, inevitable or fixed. I cannot prove this. But I prefer to live in a universe where I believe that's the case, because it means that we're not fated to live out a pre-written script. If this is true, this is the careful scientist talking now, then there's no such thing as the future singular. Rather, there are many alternative potential futures in the plural, hence the thing. That's a green laser too, by the way, because people with red-green deficiency or with red deficiency can't see it. It was important once at a conference. They had a presenter who couldn't see the red laser beam. Luckily, I had the green one. Anyway. The future can't be predicted because information about the future is always incomplete, and no matter how good your model is, at some point the uncertainties will cascade through the model and turn it into rubbish. But that's not all bad news. The good news is the shape of the future can be influenced because it's not predetermined. So our present action or inaction has consequences that play out in the future. So therefore the future does not exist or can't be studied because the future doesn't exist. So futurists don't study the future. The end. What we do is we study ideas about, or in the language of the field, images of the future. So when I asked you what does the future mean to you in your mind, things came up. They might have been literal images, they might have been a feeling or an idea, but that's what we're talking about. You can study those because those exist now. And they are complicit in the creation of the future. Because we have an idea about the future, this guides our action in the present. The actions have consequences that play out in the future. So there is a loosely coupled feedback loop between the image, the action, and the future that emerges. It's not complete, it's not exact, but that's the best you can do. So that's what futurists study. What are the images of the future? What's the range of them? Where do they come from? How are they formed? There's a whole lot of psychology and social change that goes on with that, which I don't have time to talk about today. But this is known as Dator's first law of the future. Jim Dator will meet again. There are some corollaries, therefore. There's no future facts. There's only current knowledge we think might be useful. But how do you know? How do you know it's relevant? There are only ideas and images of the future, and these are the basis of our thinking, and these are valued differently by different people, depending upon how you choose what is relevant or useful. Typically that's industry or sector-based. Well, I don't care about that because I'm focused on that. Danger, Will Robinson, because the captain of the Titanic was focused on that, not on that. And how we interpret it to the various perspectives, mindsets, worldviews, and explanatory frameworks we use to explain and explore the world. Okay, so first model. Futures triangle. This is due to Sahel Ayatollah, a well-known Australian international futurist, actually learned it directly from him. Talks about three aspects of the future: the weight, the push, and the pull. The weight of the past, these are the continuities. History, inertia, barriers to change, belief systems, and they can be internal or systemic. Then you've got the push of the present. These are the usual suspects of change: demographic change, technological change, all the stuff that you hear in trend language. And then you've got the pull of the future. These are the images, the stuff that you thought about before. How you made your decision to come here. You imagined some future state that you thought, maybe that's worth my while. But again, incomplete or ambiguous information. But that was the image that you used to bring you here. Now, all of these combine together to produce the future that actually exists. There are continuities from the past, there are processes of change in the present, and there are images of the future. And that generates the future that emerges as the eventual lived future. So the images are only part of the picture. So futurists are always paying attention to history, change, so macro history, social change, and science fiction or any sources of images of the future. Mostly science fiction these days. I'll let you read this. The key point here is that the view of the future affects the present as surely do our impressions of the past or the more tangible residues of past actions. Case study. I believe this nation should commit itself to achieving the goal before this decade is out of landing a man on the moon and returning him safely to the Earth. I sometimes do that in Kennedy accent, but maybe not today. That's one. I'm at the foot of the ladder, the 11 footbridge, or the surface of about one or two. I won't do the whole thing, but I know the speech. Would this have happened without this? Would the right-hand side have happened, benefit of the recording, would the right-hand side have happened if the left-hand side had not happened? A few people shaking their heads. Typically, we have a big discussion about this as well, and it's, yes, not in that time frame. Maybe eventually, but not that quick. This is an example of a judgment about image of the future. Now, some of you have seen this. This is the cone. I'm not quite tall enough for the visual gag to work, but you're supposed to stand here. Here's the eye looking out into the future. Okay? So everything beyond the present moment is potential futures. These are all going to begin with P. For most people, the projected future, the default business as usual extrapolated baseline, is what they think of as the future, the most likely future. Herman Kahn, famous for thinking about the unthinkable, said, the most likely future isn't. One of the scanning maxims that I use. So for most people, for many people, certainly when you're doing business in the middle of the 20th century, this was it. This year plus a few percent. And you're likely to be right. Changes got a much shorter half-life now. So more broadly are the probable futures. These are current trends and where judgment is that it's likely to happen. So remember, these are not objective measurements of the future. These are subjective judgments about ideas about the future made in the present. So these are judgments, not reality. The cone is about judging ideas, not about measuring reality. More broadly still are the plausible futures. And the judgment here is that these could happen, typically based on our current knowledge of how things work. As long as it doesn't contravene a law of physics or whatever, if you can get there from here, it's plausible. Plausibility is not enough. You also need to think about what might happen based on some future knowledge we don't yet possess. My favourite example is the warp drive from Star Trek, obviously, because there are actually solutions to the field equations of general relativity that are the warp drive solutions. They're not physical, negative energy densities and all sorts of rubbish, but there's a whole lot of discussion going on about how you might turn this into an engineering reality. It's a cottage industry, usually on the preprint server. But I remember when the guy who proposed that did this in 1994, sat down with my fellow general relativists and we calculated the components of the energy momentum and said, oh damn, not physical. Rats. But people are trying to make it work. So it's possible in the sense that it might happen, but it's not plausible because we don't know how to make it happen, but it might. Now, Kennedy spoke about a preferable future. These are should happen, want to happen. These are based on value judgments. The others are kind of cognitive. This is more emotional. Who is doing preferring depends, so what is preferred depends very much on who is doing preferring. So these are very vexed to facilitate in workshops. But more important than any of these are the preposterous futures. These are the ones where you think, no, that's impossible, that's never going to happen. Why? Because what you discover is that boundary. The boundary of what you think is possible. That means usually that some unconscious assumption, or some assumption, usually unconscious, has been crossed. What is that assumption? Let's examine it. And is it likely to hold for the duration of the future that we're talking about? This comes from the work of two people, Arthur C. Clarke's second law, the way you find the limits of the possible is by going beyond into the impossible, and Jim Data's second law of the future, which is that any useful idea about the future should appear ridiculous. Otherwise, it's not new enough, doesn't push the boundaries of our thinking enough, but this is only a necessary condition, it's not a sufficient condition. Not all ridiculous ideas are useful, but I had to write it yet. So how do you do this? Read science fiction, read fringe literature, the stuff that's way out, just don't go native. Emerging scientific and specialised technical literature, and Edward de Bono is quite good at this with his techniques of serious creativity and lateral thinking, especially provocation and movement. Movement is this idea where you don't stop and judge an idea, you just see where it leads. The single most important cognitive skill a futures thinker can develop is skill in movement, in my opinion, and so on. Now, futures thinking is inherently provocative because it typically annoys people and intrigues them. Because we question my fundamental assumptions, power doesn't like that. We critique the status quo, power really doesn't like that. We challenge worldviews, dominant worldviews really don't like that. We contest images of the future, that's politics, and crossing discipline boundaries and bounded thinking. And it quite often annoys experts, but I don't see that to be a problem. Here are some expert judgments to have a read of. Being ex-Netscape, of course, I really want to stick it to Bill Gates. Microsoft took Netscape down with its anti-competitive practice. Better delete that, Eleni, from the recording. I don't want the Microsoft lawyers coming after me. So, consider the story told by these two images. Does anyone here not have a mobile phone? I've only had two people say this. One was in an MBA class when I used to teach corporate strategy, and the crowd, the student curled around on him and said, "Why not?" She said, "I've just had a baby and I don't want the bloody thing pinging me all the time." And the other one was when I was teaching at the Defence College in Canberra, and they said, "I work in national security." Ooh. If I'd asked you in the 1960s, anyone here have a mobile communicator? I'd have been laughed off the stage. What the hell are you talking about? It's science fiction that's not serious, get the hell away. It went from preposterous science fiction to utterly indispensable today. So therefore, it's very unwise to base judgments, even expert judgments, on present time common sense. Because things change. A few more here. Does anyone admit to having a Bluetooth headset? Yeah? Oh, sorry, Uhura beat you to it. I've got another one that's got a guy talking on his phone and his female companion saying, "I'm leaving you." It's just so daggy, apparently. I used to have one, I got rid of it. Ah, yes. Portable aerials to make it possible for people to receive declarations of love by wireless telegraphy, 1906. So there's the young woman, there's the aerial on her head, she's giving the declaration of love. And there's the 2006 version. Of course, I can't show you the 2016 version, not without, you know, in the era of graphical smartphones, no, can't show you that. Not without the redaction lines. But you get the idea. 100 years ahead. Everyone's seen the Segway, but the footomobile was proposed in 1900. And there's already the OHS person thinking about what's going on there. This was good, yes, this would have been very handy during COVID. FaceTime. There's your obligatory flying car. And there's the cigarette, because this is back in the days when cigarette smoking was still good for you. 2 out of 3 doctors recommend Camel or whatever it was, Kent, you know, it was a whole big ad campaign anyway. Oh, if you've ever travelled Emirates, you know, their information, communication, entertainment system. I flew them in 2014. It looks awfully familiar for if you've ever seen 2001: A Space Odyssey. And that's a case where he lets go of the pen and it doesn't fall down, actually. So you know that there's zero gravity going. That's the pen floating there. Famous scene. Oh, this was from a student assignment. They got a good mark, because that's like, yeah. Oh, yeah, of course. I mentioned this to Michael at dinner last night. This is from Journey to the Far Side of the Sun, sometimes called Doppelganger, 1968. It was a heart rate monitor. So, futures then and now. All this stuff is imagined. Where did it come from? Because we imagined it. And some people said, this is so good, I want to make that happen. That means watch science fiction, because it's very early down the curve. Not everything will mature, but unless you've seen it, you won't recognise it when it changes from unrestricted or, you know, visionary, uninhibited thinking to where the technical experts are starting to work it out. If you read the stuff from the 1970s where people were trying to build mobile phones, they were inspired by Star Trek. They wanted to make that happen. So, the idea, the action, the future. Now, there's an important corollary of data's second law, which I derived a few years ago. You can find this on my blog. It's the Devo post. It's called Dark Clouds and Crystal Ball. Devo was the weird group from the 80s who had the red flower pot hats. Sorry, energy domes. They hate being called flower pots. But the corollary is that reality eventually becomes indistinguishable from satire. Back in 2008, we started using this. If you imagine Crazy Warehouse Guy, Mad Max will buy your car. Prepare yourself for the illegalisation of gasoline-powered vehicles. July 1, 2038. There's the, you know, petrol drop. No. Hassle-free selling. Get your cash. Affordable, you know, conversion to electric. Blah blah blah. That was satire. EU strikes the deal to ban combustion engines by 2035, ahead of schedule. Norway's already banned them. Satire, reality. Reality eventually becomes indistinguishable from satire. This was one of those bumper stickers that we used. This was another one. You have to imagine this in Eric Cartman voice from South Park. Only hippies eat fat-grown meat. By 2040, 6% of meat won't come from animals. On the business last night, the last story as I was falling asleep was about fat-grown meat. Oh, thank you. It's now being seriously discussed. Whereas when we put this up in the late 20noughties, it was satire. Who remembers the original Robocop? You're all probably too young. This machine malfunctions and it obliterates a guy. You have 20 seconds to comply. Look it up on the net. That's the URL. He puts the gun down, but it basically turns into an instinct. Right? Who in their right mind would think that turning over the kill decision to an autonomous AI would be a good idea? San Francisco supervisors did a couple of years ago. Now, I'm assuming that Robocop was meant to satire, certainly that scene. But it's become reality. And now, of course, AI is making kill decisions for certain militaries in the Middle East. Reality becomes indistinguishable from satire, eventually. And of course, the archetypal example of this, The Simpsons, March or April 2000, the episode's called Back to the Future. Lisa Simpson becomes president. Who is the most outlandishly ridiculous idea for whom she's taking over from? America, you can be my ex-wife. I don't quite know what they mean by that. I've got an idea. I can't quite say it in polite company, but anyway. Now, it's not all fun and games. I mean, I've shown you some using stuff because that's funny, but there's also a serious side to this. This comes from the Quadrennial Defence Review. The fact that conflicts producing devastation and civilian casualties have been conducted away from the US homeland can be considered one of the more fortunate aspects of the American experience. March 2001, National Defence University, these are experts in this field. So when you get it wrong, it's not just fun and games. When I do foresight, when I do it for corporates, they lose money. When I do it for defence and national security, they lose people. They're much more focused on it. They measure their failures in body bags, not in dollars lost. So, you know, if you get this wrong, the higher the stakes, then the more serious the loss. So it's not just about fun and games. And this was an expert judgment. And they were experts in the field. They were all experts in their field, all those statements. So expertise is necessary, yes, but I don't think it's sufficient. What did they miss? Well, if you read the September 11 Commission report, Chapter 11 is called Foresight and Hindsight. It mentions 4 kinds of failure. The most fundamental of which is a failure of imagination. Policy capability management, but if you can't imagine a threat, you can't formulate a policy to counter it, nor can you develop or manage the capability to mitigate it or defend against it. So imagination is absolutely fundamental. And they call it the failure of imagination. Data point. Now I've added this from our discussion last night with Michael, so I might run over time a little bit. There are 2 futures, the future of desire and the future of fate, and human reason has never learned to separate them. I'm cleaning up the gendered language from the early 20th century, but we can think of this as describing 2 aspects of the future. There's a part that we can influence and shape through our desire, and a part we cannot influence, to which we must adapt. It's not helpful, skillful, or wise to confuse them. Silicon Valley is full of people who confuse these, who believe that desiring will produce reality. And there are lots of examples of this. If you know about Stoicism, of course, there's the dichotomy of control. All you control is your attitude and your behaviour, nothing else. Stephen Covey talks about the habits in the 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, Circle of Influence, etc. So the idea is out there. There's a bit you can control and there's a bit you can't. You have to adapt to what you can't control and decide to do what you can control. Now, why is that important? We'll get there. So, Jim Data talks about tsunamis that change. I'll take it back. If I'm standing on the beach where a tsunami is going to hit, what do I see?
Water going back.
Water goes out. Okay. Interesting data point. If you know how to read it, you know it means one thing. Run like bloody hell that way and get to high ground. Okay? So if you can read the signal, you might survive. So these boats, by the way, you see how they're aligned along the axis of the wave? So they are surfing the tsunami, not being swamped by it. So Jim Data talks about surfing the tsunami's change. If you can see them coming, you can orient yourself correctly and not be obliterated by it. So the idea here is that change processes never erupt without notice. Ripples occur on the horizon, they become waves, they become tsunamis. So successful organisations and individuals are always scanning the horizon for signals of change. First point, but you've got to interpret those signals. Water goes out, gee, that's interesting. We should conduct a research paper on that. No, time for theory is past, action, run. Being better prepared, they ride out the storm to use their advantage. So this is serving the tsunamis change. But how and when do you scan? Well, there's a thing called emerging issues analysis, invented by a guy named Graham Molitor, worked as a counterintelligence agency at the Pentagon for 20 years, was watching this all, has got a complete book on how you do this, 22 Steps to Change. Got his book, corresponded with him for a while. He's no longer alive, unfortunately, but it means looking outside of conventional and comfortable sources of information. Weak signals are weak. Signal to noise ratio is practically 0. 1 data point, n equals 1. The stuff that gets you kicked out of any peer-reviewed journal. And yet, the water's going away. So most conventional scanning looks at trends, but this is too late for serious innovation or anticipation, so we need to scan the horizon. The tsunami is coming. See that dark mark there? Not looking at the beach. So here's a model. This is due to my former boss and eventual PhD student, now Dr. Conway. Emerging issues are down here, trends are here, mainstream is here. This is how much awareness there is over time. Typically, an emerging issue takes between 18 to 36 years to mature. Molitor says if you're caught by one of these, it's your fault. You have not been paying attention. So Molitor, Wendy Schultz is another one as well. She works in the UK. So what we're looking for are pockets of the future found in the present. That's where emerging issues live. Trends, mainstream, too late. Not interested. You know, the tsunami is already here. I can see it coming. That's too late. I needed to have run with the weak signal. Now, if you imagine this transposed in time, I'm nearly at the end. I might have to skip the last couple of slides. But if you imagine this transposed in time, what was once the emerging issue is now reality. Or sorry, reality was now once emerging. So transpose this into the three horizons. Very, very famous. First horizon is business as usual. Second horizon is a zone of turbulence. And the third horizon is some radically new operating environment. McKinsey's got a version of this, but this is not the same. Is it McKinsey? Maybe it's somebody else. Anyway. These are the dominant forces or drivers of change. These are change processes and trends, and these are your weak signals or emerging issues. They're the ones you've got to be watching. Pockets of the future embedded in the present. William Gibson famously said the future is already here, it's just not evenly distributed yet. He's the guy who coined the term cyberspace, by the way. If you don't know who William Gibson is, most of you are too young to know who William Gibson is, but anyway, I'm showing my age. The transition zone is where innovation happens. And there's two kinds of innovation. Innovation that tries to keep the old thing going, they call that Horizon 2 minus. But there's also innovation that tries to bring forth the new future. They call that Horizon 2 plus. There's money to be made in both of those. But where do you want to put your effort? Preserving the dying or birthing a new civilization? No judgment, that's just up to you to decide. This is the realm of analysis, this is the realm of exploration, and this is the realm of imagination. And this is what management likes to do, this is what entrepreneurs like to do, and this is what visionaries like to do. Now what happens when management looks at visionaries? Fruit Loops. What happens when visionaries look at management? Dinosaurs. Entrepreneurs kind of live in the middle, depending on their orientation. Because this is really about visions of the future or images of the future. You imagine some new thing, then you make it happen. Okay, last couple of things. I put this in because people say, oh, I've heard about scenarios. There's many ways to do scenarios. The vision, the normative scenario, that's the future of desire. Fantastic if you're a big, powerful organisation, but you don't vision your way out of extinction. The dinosaurs probably were doing visioning, but they didn't see the rock coming. All the others are scenarios. Scenarios are the future of fate to which you must adapt. Simple Darwinian, dynamics. So incremental is an official future plus an alternative. Shell used to do this. They were very famous for this. They got the oil shock right in their scenarios. The inductive ones, you gather the data and it emerges. Takes time, but it's very good. I'll talk about archetypal in a minute. You've all seen the deductive one, the 2x2 matrix. Everyone knows that. Or sometimes the 2x2x2 cube. Rarer, but I've seen those around. Morphological scenarios, these are what I love. That link contains a link to one of my blog posts where I imagine thousands of scenarios for contact when we discover alien life, whether it's stupid life or intelligent life that talks back. And now one of my proposals is in the archival literature, we're going to look at that galaxy. So it's like, hope I'm around when they do the experiment. Anyway, there's pros and cons for each. I'm going to talk about archetypal ones. These are very simple. These are, again, Jim Data, 4 kinds. All futures can be one of these 4 types of archetypes. I've yet to find a counterexample in 25 years of trying to find one. Continuation is usually imagined as continued economic growth or just growth. more of the same. Or we go to hell in a handbasket, collapse and decline. There's some breakdown of the social order, war, asteroid impact, civil war, resource depletion, whatever it is, moral degeneration, allegedly why the Roman Empire collapsed, took 300 years, slow collapse. There's also the disciplined society, organised around some overarching set of values. You tended to find ecotopia and its darker cousin, eco-fascism, in the 1970s. So this was a version of that. Nature is above all, humans are subordinate to that. Or there's the transformational one. Some entirely new system, not a return to old forms, but entirely new forms. Two kinds usually, high tech and high spirit, consciousness transformation, we need to change our mindsets. And of course, the interesting hybrid of that is post-humanism, where you upload yourself to the cloud. But who's going to run the servers? And where's the energy going to come from? So any society or idea can be filtered through these four. Now, I'll briefly mention my most recent commission from NATO was the future of the rules-based international order. And I'm trying to say it without giggling because, of course, I had to restart writing it since last year a couple of times. But I used the triangle, the archetypes, and the three horizons. Those three models were sufficient to give an ability to... It's currently in final revision. I can't talk about the content because it's not been released for the public yet. It will be available on the internet at some stage. But obviously I can't talk about the content now because there's been no sign-off. But I can talk about the models that I used. Triangle, three horizons, archetypes. So they're simple, but they're powerful. Because anything that marshals your thinking about the future into a structured way is more powerful than licking your finger and sticking it in there and going, oh, kind of, sort of. Or listening to AI. That's even worse. So, foresight is not about attempting to predict the future, not a fortune teller. It's about preparing to adapt what we cannot adapt, what we cannot change, and deciding to shape what we can change, creating the future through directed desire. The art of foresight is to realise there's difference, to balance them, and to act with as much wisdom as we possibly can given the constraints we have on developing knowledge of the future, which is always incomplete or ambiguous. So we come back to the expert judgments, have to discard these ideas. Where I work now, when you discard something, you've got to use at least a level 4 shredder. Since we cannot know the future precisely, we must delineate alternative possibilities so that choices can be tested against various future states that could occur. And I quote Shun Suzuki Roshi, in my beginner's mind, in the mind of the beginner, there are many possibilities, but in the mind of the expert, there are few. This is my first principle for SCAN, beginner's mind. Knowledge and expertise are necessary, but they're not sufficient by themselves. Facing the ever-evolving landscape, the future requires us to also use both imagination and beginner's mind. Foresight and proaction are preferable to crisis and reaction. Some people cannot be convinced of this. And I claim, over the long term, the wisdom gained from foresight costs less overall than the wisdom gained from hindsight, which makes it... But the benefits of use of foresight are often only visible in hindsight. You know what a learning experience is? It's an experience you're having that somebody else is having. Similarly with a foresight learning experience. It makes it explicitly difficult to do a highly detailed cost-benefit analysis from the perspective of today. If you've ever read The Black Swan by Nicholas Taleb, he talks about the September the 10th legislator, someone who gets all the cockpit doors locked on the 10th of September. Therefore, September the 11th never happens. Would that person have been congratulated? No. Why did you waste all this money, you idiot? The problem of the counterfactual and the counter-Cassandra effect. If you do your job well as a futurist, you won't get rewarded. And suddenly the future's here. And if you don't take the right exit, if you don't change your trajectory, you'll crash and burn. And there you go. The present moment used to be the imaginable future.